He was about to mock her in German, so sure the black waitress serving him coffee couldn't possibly understand. He had no idea she was about to shatter his ego into a million pieces. It all started in a small cafe, where the rich smell of roasted coffee beans hung in the air, mixing with the gentle clinking of ceramic cups and the quiet buzz of the morning crowd. It was one of those days that was already moving way too fast. Behind that counter was Maya Jordan, a whirlwind of efficiency. 1 second she was scribbling down an order, the next she was balancing a tray of steaming hot cappuccinos, all while topping up the sugar shakers without missing a beat. The sun had barely risen, but she'd been on her feet for hours already. It was only Tuesday, and this was her second double shift of the week. She was so focused she didn't even see him walk in. Most folks would never expect to see a titan of industry in a place like the Daily Grind, a cozy family-run spot squeezed between a pharmacy and a laundromat on 9th Street. But Pierce Hamilton wasn't the type to blend in, even if he tried. His suit was so perfectly tailored it looked like it was forged onto him, without a single wrinkle. The watch on his wrist was an intricate piece of machinery worth more than Maya's car, and the way his eyes swept across the room was cold and quick. He wasn't here to enjoy the atmosphere. His assistant trailed him like a shadow, already deep in a hushed but intense conversation on her phone, speaking rapid-fire German. Pierce claimed a table by the window, where the morning sun cast a natural spotlight on him. He didn't even glance at a menu. He just tapped impatiently on his phone, clearly waiting for someone important. The cafe was humble, but it was spotless, and the regulars all knew the staff by name. Pierce, however, had the look of a man who only learned names that appeared on contracts. Maya approached with her professional smile, the one she wore like a uniform, the one that perfectly masked how tired she really was. "Good morning," she said, her voice even and pleasant. "Can I get you something to drink while you wait?" Pierce flicked his gaze up at her for a split second before it returned to his screen. "Still water, room temperature, and make sure it's bottled." The request itself wasn't unreasonable, but his tone made it an order, not a choice. It was the kind of tone that reminded Maya she was just part of the scenery to him. She brought his water a few moments later, placing the bottle and a clean glass carefully in front of him. His assistant returned to the table, whispering something in German, her voice tense. Maya didn't catch all of it, not at first, but she recognized the language, and it sparked a memory of her time living overseas. Then, the bell above the door jingled, and a tall, older man in a sharp navy suit stepped inside. He carried himself with an air of importance, walking as if he expected the seas to part for him. Pierce immediately stood to greet him, switching into perfectly smooth German. The two men shook hands and sat, their voices dropping, but not quite enough. Maya wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She had work to do. But in a small, quiet cafe, sound has a way of traveling. She caught little bits and pieces, just enough to feel the energy at the table shift into something serious. And then she heard it. A comment about her, the waitress, spoken in a tone that needed no translation. Pierce's words were quick, wrapped in a smug little chuckle. But he had made a colossal miscalculation. Maya understood him perfectly. She hadn't just visited Germany. She had spent 3 years in Berlin, studying at a top university and working to support herself. Her German was fluent, and she knew his insult had nothing to do with her service. It was about her, about the way she looked, the apron she wore, the color of her skin. A flash of heat went through her chest. Her pen hovered over her order pad, but for a second she couldn't move. She looked at Pierce, really looked at the dismissive smirk on his face, and she made a choice. He had no idea the woman standing before him was about to become his worst nightmare, using the very language he thought was his shield. The Daily Grind wasn't a trendy hotspot you'd see on social media. There were no flashy signs or fancy menus. It was a place with mismatched chairs, a long wooden counter that had been polished smooth by the elbows of countless customers, and a chalkboard with the daily specials written in flowing cursive. The air had a sweet hint of cinnamon from the pastries cooling in the kitchen. The cafe was just busy enough to keep Maya on her toes, but it wasn't chaotic. Most of the customers were locals who had their orders memorized. An older couple was sharing a muffin in the corner, focused on their crossword puzzle. 2 college students were hammering away on their laptops in the back, lost in their own worlds with their headphones on. A construction worker grabbed his usual coffee to go, giving Maya a silent nod of thanks as he headed out the door. Pierce Hamilton stuck out like a sore thumb here. It wasn't just the expensive suit, it was the way he carried himself. He had a sharp, predatory energy, like a man who was constantly assessing the worth of his surroundings before deciding if they were deserving of his attention. His companion, the older gentleman named Mr. Sterling, seemed a bit more relaxed, but he still had that same air of corporate confidence. From her post behind the counter, Maya poured another coffee, watching the 2 of them over the rim of the pot. They weren't trying to be discreet at all, convinced that their conversation was safely encrypted in a language no one here could possibly decipher. She caught more German words. Some were business terms she vaguely recalled, but others were sharp and clear. They weren't just making small talk. They were discussing contracts, large money transfers, and names of people and companies that were clearly important. Feeling a knot form in her stomach, she made her way back over to their table. "Are you ready to order?" she asked, placing 2 menus in front of them. Pierce didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Mr. Sterling. "We'll just have coffee for now." "Black, for both of us." Maya jotted it down, though she didn't need to. She almost asked if they wanted cream or sugar, but the clipped, final tone in his voice told her not to waste her breath. As she turned to walk away, she heard it again. Pierce's voice, in German, saying something low and insulting that made Mr. Sterling give another one of those weak, uncomfortable chuckles. Maya's jaw clenched so hard she felt it in her temples. She forced herself to keep walking, to not give any reaction away. She'd dealt with rude customers her whole life. But this felt different. At the counter, she grabbed 2 clean mugs. Her mind was racing, replaying what he'd said. The words weren't just rude, they were deeply personal, and a slow-burning anger started to build inside her. She carried the heavy mugs back to their table, setting them down gently. 2 black coffees, she said, her customer service smile firmly in place. Pierce just gave a short, dismissive nod, already grabbing his phone. Mr. Sterling, at least, had the decency to thank her in English before turning back to Pierce. Maya stepped away, but she stayed close. She busied herself wiping down an already clean table right next to theirs, giving her a perfect excuse to be within earshot. The more she overheard, the more her curiosity turned into something colder, sharper. This wasn't just about a few rude comments anymore. Pierce thought his language gave him a free pass to be a monster. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. She decided right then she wasn't going to let this go. But she also knew she couldn't just blow up. The key was timing. That was a lesson she'd learned well during her time in Berlin. In tense business meetings, in university debates, even haggling at the outdoor markets. If you want to make an impact, you wait for the perfect moment when your opponent feels completely secure, totally convinced they have all the power. With a small notepad now tucked in her apron, she circled back to their table. She stood just close enough to be inside their bubble. "I just wanted to let you know," she said in a pleasant voice. "Our kitchen has a couple of specials today. A spinach and feta omelette, or the breakfast burrito if you're feeling a bit hungrier." Pierce shot her a look of pure impatience. "The omelet." "No onions, and bring it out quickly." He didn't look up again. He just slid the menu toward the edge of the table as if it were trash. The older man, Mr. Sterling, offered her a polite smile. "I'll have the same." "Thank you." His tone was much warmer, but it was obvious who was running the show at this table. Maya wrote their orders down. She leaned toward Mr. Sterling slightly and said, "We'll have those right out for you in about 10 minutes. Just then, Pierce's phone buzzed. He answered it immediately, switching back to that sharp, commanding German. Maya didn't get every word, but the tone was unmistakable. She heard the German words for nobody and wasting time. A chill went down her spine. He definitely wasn't talking about his omelet. As she walked to the kitchen, she passed a regular Mrs. Gable, who was waiting for her latte. "You're buzzing today, dear," Mrs. Gable said with a kind voice. Maya forced a smile. "Just a little extra energy in the room, I guess." She gave Mrs. Gable her drink and pushed through the swinging door to the kitchen to give the order to Leo, the cook. As the eggs sizzled on the hot grill, Maya replayed Pierce's words in her head. The way he had looked through her earlier, like she was an object. The disgusting, smug tone in his voice when he thought she was just some dumb waitress who couldn't understand him. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. When the plates were hot and ready, she balanced them expertly on one hand and pushed her way back into the dining room. She placed Pierce's omelet in front of him first, then Mr. Sterling's. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said. Pierce didn't even say thank you. He didn't even look at her. He took a sip of coffee and, under his breath, muttered something else in German to his companion. It was another jab at her, and it made Mr. Sterling's eyebrows shoot up for a second before he let out another awkward laugh. Maya turned away slowly. She carefully masked her expression, making sure they couldn't see that she'd heard and understood every single foul word. Her German wasn't just passable, it was academic. She knew the precise, ugly meaning of what Pierce had just called her. Back behind the safety of the counter, she took a deep, steadying breath. It would be so easy to just scream his words right back at him, to make a huge scene. But that wasn't the right move. That would make her look hysterical. She wanted this to land with the force of a freight train. She wanted it to be a moment he would replay in his head for years. So, she waited. She poured a coffee for another customer, she straightened the menus by the register for the third time, and she kept one ear locked on Pierce's table. Their conversation had drifted back to business, but the sheer arrogance in his voice was as loud as ever. Maya could feel the pressure building in her chest. It wasn't wild anger anymore. It was focused energy, like fuel being poured on a fire. She knew the most devastating way to strike back was to let him continue to believe he was invisible, that she was ignorant. Just for a little while longer. The cafe had started to empty out. The older couple had paid and left. The construction worker didn't come back for his usual refill. The students in the corner were too buried in their studies to notice the quiet drama unfolding. The room was much quieter now, with just the clinking of forks and the low hum of the espresso machine filling the silence. Pierce leaned back, draping one arm over the back of his chair like a king on a throne. Mr. Sterling had his fork halfway to his mouth when Pierce spoke again in German, his voice smooth as silk but laced with poison. Maya was just a few feet away, refilling the sugar shakers. She heard the entire sentence, clear as a bell. Sie sieht so aus, als ob sie einfach nur dankbar für den Job sein sollte. Translation: She looks like she should just be grateful to have a job at all." Her fingers tightened around the cool glass of the shaker. She kept her back to them, pretending she heard nothing. Mr. Sterling chuckled, but it wasn't a cruel sound. It was the awkward laugh of a man who doesn't want to rock the boat with the powerful person sitting across from him. But Pierce wasn't finished. Folgte es mit: "Man merkt, dass sie von Bildung nicht viel versteht." Translation: You can tell she's not someone who understands much about education. That one hit her like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because he said it with such absolute, unshakable confidence that he was right. The irony was almost too much to bear. Maya had a master's degree from Humboldt University in Berlin, one of the most respected institutions in all of Germany. She had authored academic papers in German. She had navigated complex, intellectual conversations that a man like Pierce couldn't even begin to imagine. And here he was, boiling her entire existence down to a tired, racist stereotype he kept in his head. She saw Leo, the cook, peek out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He shot her a look, his eyebrows furrowed with concern. He could tell something was wrong. Maya gave him a subtle shake of her head, a silent message. "I've got this." Pierce leaned forward, his voice dropping a little, but not enough. He started talking numbers, huge sums in the hundreds of thousands, and mentioning company names she didn't know. His tone had become completely smug. Then he said the words that lit the final fuse. "Ist ja niemand hier, der das verstehen würde." Translation: There's no one here who would understand this anyway. Maya gently set the sugar shaker down on the counter. The soft clink of glass on wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She straightened her back, smoothed her apron, and began to walk toward their table. She could have exploded right then and there, but she wanted more than just a confrontation. She wanted to savor the look on his face in the exact moment his perfect, arrogant world came crashing down. "Is everything all right here?" she asked in perfectly normal English, her voice calm and warm. Pierce didn't even look up. "Fine." Then, in German to Mr. Sterling, he added, "Zumindest macht sie ihren Job." Translation: At least she's doing her job. Maya allowed a tiny, faint smile to touch her lips. She gave a single nod and stepped away one last time. But inside, the decision was forged in steel. She wasn't just going to reply to him. She was going to answer him in the same flawless, academic German he thought was his own private fortress. She waited until their plates were cleared, until their coffee cups were almost empty. Then she walked back, collected their plates, and looking Pierce Hamilton dead in the eye, she said in perfect, unbroken German, "Es ist interessant, dass Sie über Bildung sprechen, Herr Hamilton, wenn Sie nicht einmal bemerken, dass jemand jeden Ihrer Sätze versteht." Translation: It's interesting you talk about education, Mr. Hamilton, when you don't even notice someone understanding every single sentence you've said. The fork in Pierce's hand stopped, hovering inches from his plate. His eyes, wide with shock, shot up to meet hers. He blinked once, twice, as if his brain couldn't process the sounds he was hearing. Mr. Sterling froze like a statue, his gaze darting between Maya and Pierce. But Maya wasn't done. She was just getting started. Pierce's fork hovered for another second before he set it down with a quiet clink on the ceramic plate. He leaned back, his expression morphing from pure shock to a complex mix of calculation and deep, profound discomfort. Maya held his gaze, refusing to back down. She continued in German, her tone perfectly level, but sharp as a razor. "You think no one in here understands you," she said, still in German. "But I've heard every single word. Every last one. From your charming remarks about my appearance, to the other things. The things you probably wouldn't want anyone else to know. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat loudly and set his coffee mug down. He looked at Pierce, his eyes wide with alarm. Pierce attempted to plaster a thin smile on his face. "Oh, so you speak German. How unexpected." He switched to English, a desperate attempt to grab the steering wheel of the conversation again. "But perhaps you misunderstood what was being said." "No," Maya cut him off, staying in fluent German. "I didn't misunderstand a thing. I lived in Berlin for 3 years. I studied there. I worked there. My master's degree is from Humboldt University. So if you think your words are somehow safe just because they aren't in English, I assure you, you are mistaken." A new kind of quiet fell over the cafe. Not everyone had been paying attention before, but the shift in tone was so dramatic that the air itself felt different. Leo was now leaning against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, no longer pretending to be busy. Mr. Sterling put his fork down for good. "Jonas," he said quietly in English, his voice a clear warning. But Pierce, driven by his wounded ego, pushed forward. His voice was colder now. "And what exactly are you suggesting you heard?" Maya looked him straight in the eye. "I heard enough to know that you think I'm beneath you. I heard enough to know that you think I should be grateful just to have this job. And I heard you talk about sums of money and company names that sound like they would be of great interest to certain people outside of this cafe." Pierce's jaw muscle twitched. It was a tiny, subtle movement, but it told Maya everything she needed to know. The hit had landed. He was frantically trying to calculate his next move, but Maya wasn't finished with him yet. "Do you know what the thing is about people you think aren't paying attention?" she asked, switching to English for a moment so the entire room could hear her clearly. "They often notice much more than you want them to." Mr. Sterling leaned toward Pierce now, murmuring something urgent and too low for Maya to hear. Pierce's eyes never left hers, but his stunned silence spoke volumes. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The unshakable confidence in her tone was doing all the heavy lifting. "I've met men like you before," she said, switching back to German, making the conversation personal again, just between them. "You walk into a room and think you can size up a person's worth in a single glance. And sometimes you might even be right, but not today." There was no triumph in her voice, no smugness. She was simply stating a fact. Pierce finally broke eye contact, looking away to pick up his coffee cup, as if he suddenly needed something to hold on to. Maya knew she had him completely off balance. A part of her wanted to twist the knife, to mention the specific names and figures she'd overheard. But she also knew the power of leaving a threat unspoken. She knew when a moment had reached its peak. She took a deliberate step back from the table. "Enjoy the rest of your coffee, gentlemen." Pierce couldn't answer. Mr. Sterling gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look that said he understood far more than he was letting on. But Maya had planted a seed of doubt and fear in Pierce's mind, and she knew it would grow. Because now he wasn't just worried about being embarrassed in a cafe. He was wondering, what else did she hear? Just how much does she know? Pierce tried to hide it, but Maya could see the telltale signs of panic, the faint tightening around his mouth, the nervous, rhythmic tapping of his fingers against the handle of his mug. That powerful, untouchable billionaire aura had shattered, and she could see the rattled man underneath. Mr. Sterling leaned closer to him, speaking in a low English whisper. "Now you decide to lower your voice." Pierce shot him a furious look. "It's fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked any conviction. He scanned the cafe in a way he hadn't before, suddenly and painfully aware that other people were in the room, watching him. 2 tables away, a man with a tablet had stopped pretending to read the news and was watching the drama unfold. The college students were still typing, but Maya knew that earbuds didn't always mean you weren't listening. And Leo was still standing by the kitchen door. Pierce took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee and leaned back, trying to put on an act of nonchalance. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," he said, his voice just loud enough for Maya to hear from the counter where she now stood. Waitresses, they sometimes hear things, but they don't always grasp the context. It wasn't an apology. It was a desperate attempt to rebuild his crumbling ego. Maya walked calmly back to his table, her expression serene, masking the steady, triumphant pulse in her chest. "If you believe context makes your words less insulting, Mr. Hamilton," she said evenly, "then you might want to think about what that says about your context." The man with the tablet was now openly staring, his eyes locked on the exchange. Pierce forced another tight, humorless smile. "I'm sure you're very good at your job. I didn't mean for any of this to get personal." Maya tilted her head slightly. "You spoke about me in my presence, in a language you assumed I couldn't understand. By definition, Mr. Hamilton, that is personal." Mr. Sterling sighed and rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. "Pierce, maybe we should just—" But Pierce couldn't stand to lose. He cut his friend off. "Look, you're clearly an intelligent woman, and I appreciate that you've spent time abroad. But this is a simple misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion." "Blown out of proportion," Maya repeated, her voice still controlled but with a new, sharper edge. "You're right about one thing. I did hear more than just your insults. I heard enough about financial transfers and specific company names to make me wonder why on earth you'd be discussing them in a public cafe. That landed like a punch to the gut." Pierce's gaze flickered nervously toward the man with the tablet, then to the students in the back. The room suddenly felt very small, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The sunlight pouring through the window didn't seem so bright anymore. Pierce lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "Careful." Maya took a small step back, giving a single knowing nod as if he'd just confirmed everything she suspected. "You're right," she said. "Careful is an excellent idea." She turned and walked away, but not far. She returned to the counter, where she had a clear view of their table. Pierce and Mr. Sterling were now speaking in fast, clipped sentences. Pierce looked deeply unsettled, his hand rubbing his jawline as if trying to wipe the tension from his face. A part of Maya was satisfied, content to leave him stewing in the discomfort of being seen. But another part of her, the part that remembered every single person who had ever dismissed her, underestimated her, or assumed she was less than them, wanted to push one last time. But before she could decide, Pierce made his final move, and it told her everything she would ever need to know about the true character of this man. Pierce reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek black card holder. He opened it slowly, deliberately sliding out a single, crisp business card. The way he held it, between two fingers, wasn't casual. It was a presentation, a calculated offering of what he believed was an escape route. He placed it on the edge of the table, near where Maya was standing. "If you ever want a better job," he said, his voice once again smooth as silk, "call my assistant. I'm sure we can find a position that better suits your talents." Maya stared at the card, then looked back at his face. "Is this supposed to be an apology?" she asked, her voice quiet. "It's an opportunity," Pierce replied coolly. "Sometimes it's better to move forward instead of dwelling on petty misunderstandings." Maya let out a soft breath through her nose. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was close. "You think you can insult me, question my intelligence, and then try to buy my silence with a job offer? That's not moving forward, Mr. Hamilton. That's trying to bury what you did." Mr. Sterling shifted in his seat, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Pierce, let's just let this go." Maya rested her hands on the back of an empty chair, her voice calm and powerful. "Do you know why I came back from Berlin, Mr. Hamilton? It wasn't because I failed. I had a great job, wonderful friends, a whole future mapped out. But my younger brother Sam got sick. He needed someone to take care of him, someone to help pay for the treatments that our insurance refused to cover. So I came home," she continued, straightening up and meeting his gaze directly. "I work double shifts at this cafe, not because it's the best I can do, but because it gives me the flexibility to be there for my brother when he needs me. So when you look at me and see someone who should be grateful for a job, you are missing everything that matters about me. And when you assume that because I'm a black woman pouring your coffee, I can't possibly understand you, you're not just wrong. You are showing the world the exact kind of blind arrogance that makes people stop trusting powerful men like you." The cafe was now quieter than it had been all morning. Even the espresso machine was silent. Pierce glanced from Maya's unyielding eyes down to the business card he had offered, then back up. For the first time since he walked through that door, the billionaire had no comeback. He was utterly defeated. Maya didn't wait for him to find one. She reached out and picked up the business card. She held it for a moment, then turned it over and placed it face down on the table in front of him. "You can keep it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I think you're the one who needs the opportunity, an opportunity to actually start listening to the people you think are beneath you." Pierce's mouth was a thin, hard line. Mr. Sterling gave Maya another small nod, but this one was different. It was a nod of pure, unadulterated respect. Maya stepped back from the table, collected their empty plates, and walked to the kitchen without a single glance over her shoulder. She didn't need to. The point had been made, loud and clear. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Pierce take the card and slide it back into its holder, his expression now completely unreadable. He muttered something to Mr. Sterling, who just shook his head. Maya poured herself a glass of water, her hand trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. She hadn't wanted to cause a scene today. But sometimes, a scene is necessary when the truth finally demands to be heard. As Pierce Hamilton stood up to leave, his crushing silence told her that the message, for the first time in his life, had been received. Even if his pride would never let him admit it. Pierce left without another word. The little bell above the door jingled softly as he and Mr. Sterling stepped out into the bright Arizona sun. Maya watched through the window as they crossed the street and vanished into a waiting black sedan. Slowly, the cafe began to breathe again, returning to its normal, peaceful rhythm. The college students kept typing. Mrs. Gable came back to the counter for a second latte, giving Maya a warm, knowing smile. And Leo finally went back into the kitchen. But for Maya, the air felt different. It felt lighter. The smile on her face was no longer for customer service. This one was real, and it was all hers. It was the smile of someone who had stood her ground and won. She went about her work, wiping down tables, not because she had to, but because the simple, repetitive motion was calming, letting the moment truly settle in. She didn't know if a man like Pierce would ever truly change how he saw the world. Maybe he would just tell himself she overreacted. Or maybe, just maybe, he would think about her words the next time he sat down in a restaurant. She couldn't control him. But she could control how she carried herself, and she had reminded herself today that her worth had absolutely nothing to do with the job title on her name tag. Just before the lunch rush hit, Maya stepped outside for a quick breath of fresh air. Life on the street was moving on as it always did. Cars drove by, people chatted on the sidewalk, She thought about her brother Sam at home, about the hard choices she'd made for her family, and about how easily men like Pierce underestimate the people pouring their coffee. She smiled to herself again, a smile of pure certainty. He would remember her, not because she embarrassed him, but because she had forced him and everyone else in that cafe to understand that respect is never optional. And that's the real takeaway here. It doesn't matter if you're in a high-rise boardroom or behind a cafe counter. The way you treat other people says everything about you, more than any language, any job title, or any amount of money ever could. And if someone ever tries to write you off based on what they think they see, let them talk. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is show them, in their own words, just how incredibly wrong they are. Never, ever let anyone make you feel small. And if they try, be ready to speak up in whatever language they least expect.